I'm so
Hi,
excited
Melissa.
for you guys to hear what is going on today. I have seen a sneak peek of Cherian's presentation. It is phenomenal. I can't wait for you guys to hear about it. Just a couple of things before we get started. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Abby. I'm part of the team over at QGive, and one of the reasons we love having people like Cherian on is because we know that there's so much more to a solid fundraising strategy than online fundraising tools. We provide the fundraising tools. There's a lot that goes into using them well. And that's why I'm really excited that Cherian is going to give you some insight into how your donors think and how they process information and how they decide to give. I see some familiar names on this list. So if you are a QGive client and you have any questions at all about how to apply any of what we talk about today to your own account, let me know. I can get you in touch with the right people. If you are not a QGive client, everything you learned today is going to be applicable to you too. So I hope all of you are ready to take super great notes because there is a lot of amazing information that you're going to look at today. A couple small things. If you, for any reason, have to leave early, or if you want to share this session with a friend of yours, we are recording this session and you will get a copy of the recording probably tomorrow, unless YouTube does something unprecedented. If you have any questions, I am going to be moderating the questions. So if you have questions, you'll type into the questions box. Many of you have found it. If you are interacting with us at all, type into the same questions box. You're going to have some really fun interaction opportunities, and that's how you're going to do it. If you are super into interacting with us and you are a Twitter user, we're going to be tweeting some of the highlights over at the QGive Twitter account, and the hashtag we're using is hashtag QGive webinar. I also dropped Cherian's Twitter handle in there just in case. He posts a ton of great stuff. And a lot of it is going to have to do with what he is talking about with us today. Let me switch things over to him. There we go. Does that work?
It does, yep.
Perfect, awesome.
There we go. Yay, hopefully everybody can see that. Does that sound right?
I see the presenter mode, so I can see like your upcoming slides as well.
Let's try that.
Oh, there we go. Now it's
Great.
advanced. Sweet.
Weird, but technology, there we go. So thanks everybody for being here. Super excited to share this with you. There are, I was telling Abby before, there are 97 slides in here. So some of the slides are really just research and links. So don't feel like you need to jot those things down. You'll have access to them and can click on them and follow the research and go from there. But want to start out by talking to you about decisions generally. Here we go. And the strategies that we use to decide or ultimately not decide when it comes to the choices that affect our daily lives. So does anybody have a guess of how many decisions the normal human makes in a given day? Just throw those into the questions box. Let's make sure that the questions box is working right. Go ahead and throw out how many decisions do you think you make in a given day? 1,000, 10, 650, 10, 2,000, 150, a gazillion. Nice, Kelly. Too many, absolutely. The answer is, according to Cornell University, 35,000 remotely conscious decisions. And according to those researchers, we make about 227 decisions on food alone. So it is an amazing amount of decisions that we face. And some of those we're not super conscious of, but I'm conscious right now of the words that I'm choosing. I'm conscious of the way in which I'm phrasing a sentence. So there are so many different questions, and I'm thinking about, okay, what's the next slide, and what are those things I'm thinking about? I'm also thinking about lunch because all those things are a piece of this. So there are a number of strategies that humans deploy when they're trying to figure out how to make sense of those 35,000 decisions or even the hundreds on food. One is impulsiveness. That happens a lot with food, right? We just grab whatever is closest and eat that thing. But impulsiveness is ultimately that we leverage the first option that is available to us. Compliance is another strategy where we choose something that would be pleasing to others, and it's a popular option when there are social decisions being made. Delegating is a strategy that we use when we don't want to make that decision ourselves, or we have too many decisions that we're dealing with. Balancing and prioritizing are a couple of other strategies that we use when it comes to decisions to really think through what are the impacts of this? What are the consequences of this? And let me tell you folks, as a fundraiser, that's the thing that you think of when you think of donors making decisions, is balancing, weighing out, should I spend this money? Should I make this gift? Those types of things. In reality, if you fall asleep for the next 45 minutes of this conversation, the thing that you need to remember is that what you are fighting is not logic. What you are fighting when it comes to donor decision making is not about balancing priorities and should I give and should I not give. What you are balancing is what I call the inertia of inaction. The inertia of inaction is the strategy that is most deployed when it comes to decision making, which is avoidance. We don't want to make a decision, so we just don't. And there are plenty of examples of this, but in reality, you'll see how people will say that they care about things like poverty or hunger or racism, and they care about them, but they don't do anything about them. And that's the challenge that we're trying to overcome as we talk through the rest of this session. So hopefully you're still awake and you're still with me. Here are the 4 things that we're going to cover through this session. The first is core concepts. If you're at all familiar with decision science, behavioral science, or neuromarketing, these core concepts are things that you're going to be familiar with. But for those of you that are familiar with it, we're going to go into a little bit of depth to talk about why and how those things are done well or done poorly. If you're not familiar with it, this is a great introduction to some of these concepts that are sort of already out there. Then we're going to talk about some advanced concepts. These are concepts that you might not be using, and we're going to have some fun and a special guest come back for that one. And then I'm going to give you a word of caution before we go into the strategies that are even beyond behavioral science and what we're doing in that space as scientists and researchers and fundraisers. So let's start with these core concepts and what they mean to you. So one that you've certainly heard of and all of us have experienced over the last year is the concept of scarcity. I don't know how many times I walked into a grocery store to see this exact scene of empty shelves, and it drives our decision making. We had people who were hoarding toilet paper or hoarding other types of things. So you know that this definitely influences our decision making. So the framework that I'm going to use for all of these concepts is to talk about the scientific study, to show you how it's done poorly, then how it can be done correctly, give you a slide that I'm not going to talk about, which is further research, and then give you a nonprofit, a fundraising example of all of those. So let's take a look at the scientific study. What they did to define and demonstrate the concept of scarcity was to show people a plate of cookies. Again, those food decisions, right? So if I show you this picture and then ask you to assign a value to the cookie, how much would you pay for those cookies? You would come up with a very different answer than if I showed you a plate filled with cookies. If you saw the picture on the left and only the picture on the left, you would increase the value or how much you would spend to buy those cookies than if you saw the big plate of cookies. And that's because of our internal biases, our internal perceptions when it comes to scarcity. The other bonus item that you'll have here on these slides is, if you choose to tweet about it, I don't care, but the concept kind of succinctly so that you can think about it is at the bottom of the slide, which is if it's rare, you care. If it's rare, you care. And that's how we make our decisions when it comes to scarcity. How is that done poorly? It's done poorly when we create limited access to an unlimited good. Limited access to an unlimited good is something where everybody sort of knows that this is, for example, a digital product that doesn't have limitations on it, but you say, you know, act now, you have to do this. This is the kind of late night TV infomercial where like, I'm still going to be able to get this tomorrow. You don't need my money right now. I can make a decision. And when you do that in the nonprofit space, it decreases trust. The other thing is artificial scarcity, again, with something that's digital, or even when it comes to donating, there really isn't scarcity, right? There's rarely an instance where scarcity truly exists. When it comes to a product, we can just make more, right? So the question is, do you fall into the trap of using limited access for an unlimited good or creating artificial scarcity? But how can it be done well? So limited access to an actual limited item will actually drive value. So one example of that for us in the arts world, I'm an arts fundraiser, that's what I do on a normal day, is that there's a limited set of tickets, right? There's only so many people that can be in the room where it happens, and because of that, it generates interest and excitement around that concept. There's also the idea of location uniqueness. So if you have multiple locations as a nonprofit, it's a way in which you can create scarcity of something in a particular location. So if something is only available in a certain place or at a certain time, that generates scarcity. Restaurants do this well, especially restaurants that have flexibility with their menus. There are products that are available. We have a barbecue place that has a bucket of bacon, but it's only at one location. So if you want a bucket of bacon, which, I mean, who doesn't, then you have to go to the Jethro's down the street. You can't go to the Jethro's around the corner. So location uniqueness can create that scarcity. The other piece is controlling quantity. So if there are a number of opportunities that are available, for example, sponsorship opportunities, demonstrating that some of those have already been taken and you'll only accept a certain number in that tier, for example, because of whatever the limitations are that are reasonable, that are appropriate, controlling quantity or being able to distribute those across donor groups or sponsors, whatever the case may be, can demonstrate that that scarcity as well. And the same thing is true with restricting time. So if things are only available for a certain period of time, that's a way in which you can develop that scarcity piece as well. So remember that at its core, time shortcuts decision making. So if we limit the amount of time that people have and they feel like something's limited, then they're more apt to make a decision to pay more or buy more of those things. And we'll get to an example. So this is the research. If you want to follow that, I encourage you. I think a lot of times as fundraisers, we accept blindly the statement that's made from some thought leader, and they're not necessarily wrong, but follow the research and identify how that's playing out. So this is the best example of scarcity that is really important. I don't know why these are all food now. This is now making me really hungry, but so Girl Scout cookies are a great example of both time restricted and limited quantity. There was, I was at a grocery store and they had a table set up and the troop had boxes everywhere. And I wanted to be like, girls, I will double the amount of sales. Just take most of those cookies away and put them behind like a curtain or something. If you're able to demonstrate that the time's running out, there's not a lot left, that's how you're going to move that kind of product. So for those of you that are doing fundraising through like product sales, not having a lot of them actually will drive the ability to move that product, if you will. So the next example is social proof. You're all, I'm sure, very familiar with the concept of social proof. The key phrase here is that birds of a feather flock together. You know this, you've heard this before. We like to be in groups, and even when we feel like we want to be our own kind of independent entities, we try to find other independent thinkers that think like us. So what does that look like from the science perspective? Well, if you want a kid to not be dog phobic or pet phobic, if you will, the scientific study here is kids who were afraid of dogs, when shown other kids playing with dogs were much less likely to be dog phobic, meaning that they would play with dogs because they saw other kids playing with dogs. And it wasn't just immediately, it also persisted over a longer period of time. So what does that look like from the perspective of nonprofits? How do we do that poorly? One big challenge with social proof is misidentification. If I am either a certain demographic or I believe certain things about myself, I have a certain identity, then telling me that other people feel the same way, do the same things, only works if those are people that I feel like are like me. If they're not like me, that misidentification creates the opposite effect, where I'm like, I don't want to be like them. I don't want to do that. And we'll get into some examples of what that looks like. So done well, scarcity can be broken into, or sorry, social proof can be broken into a few different areas. For first-time donors, a volume of testimonials and recommendations is helpful. They want to know that a lot of people are interested, because again, time restricts our thinking. It changes how we think about things. And if I haven't made that action, then knowing that a lot of people have cared about this cause is helpful. When it comes to major donors who are making a more significant investment and are really thinking through balancing, prioritizing those types of things, or legacy donors who are thinking about a gift in wills, then specific recommendations are going to be helpful, meaning that we want to have an example of someone else who's given a major gift, or someone who's given a legacy gift in the way that you're thinking about giving it, whether it's a bequest in wills or a CRT or a CGA, whatever that case may be. So wherever the case is that you're using social proof, make sure that you're using role models that reflect those particular and reinforce that behavior. So you want positive, aspirational role models when it comes to social proof. Remember, they want to be considered among that group. They want to believe that they're part of that same group of people. Again, here's the research for you. So what does this look like then from the example for nonprofit? So if you are not following Globetrotting Fundraiser, which is Ligia Pena, on Twitter and in emails and things, on her emails and things like that, I would highly recommend it. She shared these with me. This is some of her work in Greenpeace, where you have examples and testimonials of gifts in wills from specific people and interviews with them so that you can get to know them better. And Charity Water has this example on their website of this thing called the tributary. And so these are also good examples, again, of those higher end, bigger, more substantial gifts that are social proof examples. So you hopefully see yourself in those examples. So the next core concept is prospect theory and loss aversion. So this is a core concept. It's probably one that you've heard of before, but I want to kind of go through this in a little bit more detail. There isn't a good picture of this one, unfortunately, but you're probably familiar with the fact that that Daniel Kahneman and some of his colleagues developed this. They won the Nobel Prize. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for this. And if you can see on the screen, in the green area where it hits 100, that positivity is less than in that red area, meaning that we feel losses more significantly than we feel gains. Gains don't feel as good to us as losses feel bad to us. So the kind of the idea to remember is that loss is boss and pain means gain. Loss is boss and pain means gain. So when we're thinking about crafting a donor appeal, or we're thinking about fundraising when it comes to prospect theory and loss aversion, we're framing things potentially as probably as a loss, but we want to avoid going so far in the direction of an uncorrectable loss. So what these authors, these scientists found, is that at a certain point on that, in that red curve, there's a point at which you don't undertake risk-taking behavior. You don't do things that will correct it because it's too helpless or it's too hopeless. But you can go pretty far down there. I mean, that's one of the things that these authors found, is that while we're more concerned about a 10% loss than we're excited about 10% gain, at some of those higher loss stakes, even at negative 200 or something like that, we are more willing to engage in risky behaviors. For example, if we are gambling literally at a casino and we are down further than we want to be, we are more willing to put in more chips or go into our pocket to take out more money in order to reverse that trend. Obviously, then at a certain point, those systems change and we're like, okay, now I've lost a lot of money, I'm not going to chase it. But that's pretty far down there. So the next thing to think about it from loss aversion is how to do this well. One is to package the pain. An aggregate loss is less effective for that exact reason, that too much loss is challenging for us to wrap our head around. So if we're looking at loss, creating kind of a segmented loss, smaller pains, these types of things will be lost, and spreading those out actually has a greater effect than just one big loss. And the same is true on the opposite side. So segregating the success is true. $10 given 12 times actually feels better than $120 given once. So if there are ways in which you can incorporate that into your fundraising strategy, those are good things to do. One big recommendation that I have is to change the wins. So rather than continuing to demonstrate the gains to your donors or provide them with incentives or bonuses or thank yous, is to change them. So if, for example, the example that I have here is the first Coke is better than no Coke at all, of course, but the first Coke is better than the fourth Coke, but the first bag of chips after that first Coke, why am I always talking about food? I must be really hungry. That first bag of chips after the first Coke has more value, adds more value to the second Coke. So if you keep repeating the same things, the same surprise and delights, or the same delighters, as Jen Love says, they're going to get desensitized to those, and the value of that good is not going to be as high as if you change those wins. The last recommendation for you on loss aversion is to frame appeals as averting loss rather than obtaining gains. So if you are able to describe an opportunity to give as averting a loss, like this program will be lost, or this access to this for kids or for adult, whatever it is, if we can describe that as averting a loss, donors are more likely, based upon this science, to engage with that appeal than they are if you are approaching it from gaining access or adding to an opportunity. So with that, here's the science from Kahneman. This was an early article from Kahneman. You probably read some other things from Dr. Kahneman, but this idea was what he won the Nobel Prize for. And then there's some more recent research there for you as well. So here's the cool thing: loss aversion is real specific in fundraising. So when I talked about framing appeals as a loss, there's a whole scientific study on describing something as a loss of an art exhibit versus getting a new art exhibit. You can follow that example, nudging art lovers to donate. The other one is on the benefit side, like if you offer some delighter to a donor. This was a study done on motivation based upon giving someone a coffee mug after they donate. So again, all the things I just talked about reinforced in those studies. Next is reciprocity. Sorry, I went by that really, really fast, but you can see the picture later when you look at the slides. The thing to remember here is that to change a behavior, start with a favor. To change a behavior, start with a favor. So let's look at what the science says on this issue. So the sociologist I think it was in the 70s, maybe it's on the slide, but he sent out a whole bunch of Christmas cards. It included a family photo and they were handwritten cards. 600 people picked at random, and 200 people replied to a complete stranger because They sort of felt like they had to. And there's the link to that study there. So what the sociologist found is that people are innately inclined to reciprocate when they get something. Now, let me be very clear that this is every culture ever studied, that we have a concept of being essentially a sociopath or someone that's excluded from communal living because of their unwillingness to reciprocate. So this has been validated across cultures and in all kinds of different contexts where reciprocity is a key component. In France, for example, if they tested whether people would respond to a survey. If you give someone a piece of candy, it wasn't a Snickers because that's not a French candy, but you get the idea. So much food. I must be really hungry. So this is really awkward. I'm sorry about all this food. I hope you're eating after this. So if you give them candy in advance, they're 2.5 times as likely to respond to your survey if you give them the candy in advance. So there are things like material reciprocity. If you give them a piece of candy, if you give them an Amazon gift card, will they respond? The survey says yes, they will. There are other things like emotional reciprocity. So if you give them things like good stories and feel good, like emotional stories and videos and things like that, they'll respond as well. So how do we do this poorly? We do it poorly when we give after we've taken. That is, we've given them something like a coffee mug in that last study or that last section. Then it's not reciprocal, right? It changes the transactional nature of the gift, but also when we make reciprocity perfunctory. So when people just sort of expect it. There are some really good examples of waiters using reciprocity, giving something in advance like mints, and how that changes tips. That's a really fun one. Go Google that. That's a really fun study to look at. So to do it well, you need to make the first move. That is, give something in advance, whether it's material or emotional, depending on your organization, in order to make that stick and make that reciprocity function. All of these studies are linked in here for you as well. The second is to make it social. The more that you're able to involve other people in that reciprocity and sort of make it public in some way, the more people feel inclined to respond in like form. And then lastly, to make it face-to-face. So the Meyer study is really good in that it tried to replicate that sociologist with the Christmas cards, but he did it with email and found the response rate was terrible. A lot of that has to do with email as a medium. So just be thoughtful of how you can personalize your reciprocity approaches. So there's another study for you in terms of reciprocity. The best example from a nonprofit perspective is something like a premium, a mailing label, or something like that generates reciprocity. Oh, geez, they gave me something. I feel like I need to make some kind of gift. Plenty of other examples, but you get that idea. So now we're on to advanced concepts. Hopefully you are jazzed and excited about what we're going to talk about now. These are really cool things, some of which you've heard about, but we're going to have some fun with them. So the first one is priming or framing. This is a really powerful concept. And again, we're going to follow the same concept, the same format. These are two actually very different concepts that I have to meld together because of time, but there are two phrases to remember. One is what you say determines how much they'll pay. What you say will determine how much they pay. And second, if it's been rehearsed, it will come out first. If it's been rehearsed, it will come out first. So let's look at the science behind that. The study that they did was a word scramble. You had a bunch of letters and you made them into words, but the words that they would create are things like the word rude or interrupted or those types of concepts. So you unscramble the words, you come up with that word, and then they had a conversation with two people, and they watched how often people would interrupt or would be rude, and they found a very high correlation between the words that you unscrambled and how you interacted with those circumstances right after that study. So there are a few examples of how priming is done, priming and framing are done, or strategies to do it. One is conceptual. So there's conceptual framing, and the best example that I can give you of that is if I were to ask you to volunteer for an organization, you might not. If I start by asking you to identify the traits of superheroes, what do Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel, the Scarlet Witch, whatever, what do they have in common? What are some features of them? And you think about them, you actually write them down. The scientific study that they said is that you're 4 times as more likely to volunteer if those frames have been created for you. Now, we're not exactly sure why, but that's the study that was conducted, that frame makes you more likely to volunteer. That study is posted later for you to look at as well. There are semantic priming. So if I say something like glue, and I got glue on my shoe and I can't think of what to do, and then I ask you to name a color, most of you would say the color blue. You probably said that in your head. And the reason is because our brains shortcut from that priming, from that framing. You approach it from that perspective. So that's semantic priming. The third kind of way in which you can approach this is with positive or negative framing. So things like speed or speed and negativity are connected to one another, whereas slow and positivity are connected together. These are a little harder to do, but one example of a positive and negative reinforcement that's really fascinating to me, if anybody's works in an art museum, there's a study that you'll see later that by changing the smell in your art museum, you can change whether people will repeat, whether they'll come back to your museum, and how likely they are to engage with your brand. The smell in the museum, not even joking, that's the priming that can occur, and they've studied that as well. Kindness is a reciprocity priming concept. So a first free drink is a way that a lot of for-profit organizations, Fortune 500 organizations, use priming in order to connect you. Every time you see a free trial, that is priming, my friends. That is how consumer science is being used against you to get you connected to their product. So free trials are, in essence, an element of kindness that you now think, oh, I'm just going to stick with it. Oh, I like this, just fine. They gave me something for free. All of those pieces playing together. Colors are also a way in which priming works. So things like green means health, red means power, blue is calm, yellow is happy. So if, for example, you have been looking at the slide, you see things like green, and you see the yellow priming slide. If I asked you to name a fruit, many of you would come up with a pineapple or a banana or something like that, and they've tested that as well. So those colors can generate different feelings and emotions, but also suggest certain things. We are, as it were, very highly suggestible. So the superhero thing about volunteering is on this slide, and a couple of other pieces as well for you for research, just in case you're interested there. And that museum smell olfactory marketing one is right in the middle. So if you are an art museum, I hope you go try that and check it out. So what does priming do? So I hope nobody's from the Wikimedia Foundation, because this is an example of priming done poorly or framing done poorly. So you've probably seen this. If you've donated to Wikipedia, you are in the vast minority according to them. So take a look at all of the priming and framing things that they do wrong here. In the context, they say 98% of our readers don't give, meaning that's like me. I don't give, I'm in the majority. They also say a price of a cup of coffee is all we ask. That triggers loss aversion. I like my cup of coffee from Starbucks. I don't want to lose that, and I don't want to give it to you. The last thing they say in the text is, we know that most people will ignore this message. So I'm in good company when I ignore this message. And then you'll see over on the right side of the screen where they prime you with a very low number, $2.75, or even in the text, I think I covered over it because it's frustrating, is, even a gift of $5. Well, if you framed it as that cheap, as that worthless, these things connect with our brain. We take shortcuts. I don't have a lot of time. I like Wikipedia. I use it a lot, but I'm not going to give you money if you don't think it's important either. So here are some examples of, the science around framing has to do with like ground beef. The scientific study is ground beef that 25% fat is worse than 75% lean. So that's why you see every ground beef labeled as 75, 80% lean, not 25 or 10% fat. So here are some examples, and these aren't bad or good examples, so that's why I've left the names in here of these organizations. But notice how this organization, the Overtime Theater, frames ticket sales cover less than 25% of our operating revenue. Whereas the Smith Center in Las Vegas, I know there's someone in Las Vegas in the audience here, they say that ticket sales cover only 75% of everything that we do. I would love to test this and to know like what they do, what, how this plays out, and to see like if the Smith Center said 25 instead of 75, would that change what my friend Emma gets out of her donations? But it's just an interesting example of how the two concepts say something in a different way that might affect how their giving occurs. So the next concept is anchoring. Super excited about this one. The concept that you want to remember is what you start with, what will determine what you part with. What you start with will determine what you part with. So let's do this scientific study live. Abby, how are you, my friend? Can you hop back on?
Yeah.
So Abby's going to help us out with this one. We are going to we're going to test anchoring. What you're going to do is are you on the screen? I don't know how that works, but it's okay either way. I trust Abby, our special guest, to help with this. So what she's going to do is she's going to mute her speakers so that she can't hear us, and then she's going to turn away for 30 seconds while you all do this exercise. So if you're ready, and everybody prime themselves, get ready to go into the questions box. So click on that, and then in about 5 seconds, you're going to have something pop up on the screen, and I'm going to need you to answer in the questions box. So ready, right. Abby, are you ready? I think that means she's ready. So good. Here's the number that I want you all to multiply in your head. Don't use a calculator at all. Multiply this number as quickly as you can. You have 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In the chat, go ahead and enter your number. Okay, we've got great ones in the chat. So then while Abby's coming back on, I want you to all go to dmpa.org.donate. That's my organization. I'm just joking. I'd love it if you donate.
Oh no, I can't hear.
Oh, you're probably still on mute. But go ahead and indicate a number that you would put into this blank field into the donate box. You're cool, Abby, if you can hear. This is after. So go ahead and enter how much you would donate, and put a $sign next to that so that I know how much we can pay. Let's send you a pledge form on. Abby, you're back. Are you back?
My audio isn't working, so I can't hear.
Oh no.
Hang on.
Okay. Well, you all just keep putting in numbers there while we do that. These are great. These are great answers. Love it, folks. These are great. Okay.
Okay.
You
My
ready?
audio works now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So Abby, we're going to do this with you live. Okay. So I'm going to show you. There you are. Hi. Okay. So you have 10 seconds. Let me know what you think the answer to this math problem is.
Oh God.
9, 8, 7.
My computer's not working. Oh, I hate all of this.
Yeah. Just throw out a number. It's good.
512.
512. Okay, great. Now, if you were to go to dmpa.org and donate, what number would you put in this field?
Like 50.
Okay, great. So now I'm looking at all the people in Des Moines and Central Iowa who are positioning this. So so I'm not going to hold you obviously all to donate to my organization, but it's the same number. And what you'll see if you scroll back up in the chat is for those of you who were trying to do the math in the audience, you all came up with a number like 120, 5,000, 750. You know, some of the, oops, sorry, my bad. So you came up with a low number, and the reason why you came up with a low number is because the digits started with in the ones and then it went up. For Abby, who came up with 512, which is still a little low, she started with these nines and framed her number based upon that. And so you'll see that if you look then at how much you would have donated, your number is $25. $1. Somebody doesn't like me. Christina, Carrie's only giving $1. Somebody's only giving $9. Come on, folks, the arts are important. Just kidding. So you get the idea, though, is that based upon a number that we show you, it frames what you're thinking. And of course, everybody's way off. We're at 3.5 million, actually. But what this tells you is that putting your highest number first makes a gigantic difference in how people think and how they're primed and framed in terms of being ready to make a certain number. So we don't have a lot of numbers on that page, but whatever leads you to that donate page should have a big number on it. But of course, don't price too high, because if you do, then that systems two thinking will occur and people will be like, oh no, now I got to think about this, and now I'm into balancing and prioritizing and all of that nonsense. So you don't want to do that. The other thing is that anchoring works best when decisions are fast. So remember, I gave you 10 seconds to come up with that answer, and it was really hard to do the actual math. Or when people are new to the decision. And so there's some more science there around that as well. So remember, what you start with will determine what you part with. Again, here is the science again from Kahneman on those pieces as well, if you want to follow that. So let's take a look at some examples. This is an example that I just really think has done an amazing job. Greater Pittsburgh Community Foundation, or Community Food Bank, sorry. Let's take a look at what they've done well. There's at least 4 things that they've done super well here. First, you'll notice the green. Food bank, what does green mean? From our priming example, it means healthy. And they use the word healthy in the title there. But green also has to do with money, so we're kind of priming in that respect. You'll see they highlight greatest impact. What's next to greatest impact? Donate monthly. That's what you want them to do. And yes, I want to donate $25 a month. So that's super highlighted. In the US, I don't know if anybody's from like the Middle East or from Asia on this call, but if you read right to left instead of left to right like we do in the US or the West, then this would be different. But we read left to right, which means $500 is the first number that I see. That's anchoring. I'm now primed to believe that $500 is, I might not give you $500, but that's where I'm primed to operate from.
Hey,
So,
Cherian,
yeah.
your slide is stuck. We still see the anchor slide.
Oh dear, no. You need to see the community food bank slide.
This is, I mean, this is a great slide. No, I still see the anchor.
Let me try this. Let me try this again. How's that?
Other people can see the food bank chat. I can't.
Oh.
That's cool.
Oh, maybe it's just you. That's sad. Well, we'll keep going. Yay. Okay, let me, I can see the anchors.
I feel less bad about my computer wigging out when I muted myself. It's just a hard thing to go to webinar.
It looks like some people can see the food bank slide. So we're now looking at the World Vision slide, if that makes sense. So I'm sure that World Vision gets all the monies and they're doing great. If you are part of World Vision, I love the organization and what you do. I would just change this anchor. So rather than anchoring at 50, I would anchor higher, and potentially default to monthly if the case may be. So next, so that's all on anchoring and priming. So next I want to talk about commitment and go through that really quickly. Commitment, the phrase that I want you to remember is capture their heart with a small start. A lot of times we try and get big commitment really quickly. It's sort of like asking someone to get married on the first date, but instead you want to start small. So the scientific study here was actually about public energy usage, actually in Iowa. And if it was publicized in the local newspaper, it changed whether people decrease their temperatures and things like that. So to do commitment well, you want to start small. We would often, in another organization I worked with, ask them to sign a petition. That's a good way of low cost engagement that demonstrates a commitment to the organization and to its values. Using leading language is always helpful. We do this all the time. We talk about our donors as generous donors like you, loyal supporters. The reason, there's really fascinating studies on this about how like you internalize that language and it changes how you believe. So anytime you're talking about donors, you want to talk about them as generous, thoughtful, committed, supportive, loyal, that type of language. As I say that in my head, I become that narrative. I become that person. And then as much as possible, make it public on the wall, in publications, in newspapers, on websites. Those types of commitments make a huge, huge difference in how committed I remain, because I've already made a public statement of what I care about and how I feel about it. So I want to reinforce that with my behavior. Here's the study on energy conservation. And here's an example of a small commitment from Heifer International. You just buy some chickens. Chickens, everybody likes chickens. We want to give some chickens. It's only 20 bucks. And that's an opportunity for them to engage with you further and to create a kind of a longitudinal, here's what your chickens did. Now there's more chickens. Now go buy a goat, go buy a cow, all those types of things. The next one, which is really important for fundraising, is nostalgia. The thing to remember here is what's old is gold. What's old is gold. If you write about nostalgia, the study that they did, if you write about nostalgia, 150% more of a contribution, specifically about donating, you are more willing to part with your money if you consider nostalgia, if you consider something important, relevant from your past. So when you're thinking about how to do nostalgia, you need to think about what does nostalgia mean for your audience. For us, one of the first questions that we ask a donor is, what was the first performance you went to? What do you remember about that first performance? Why? Because that nostalgia helps them to go back in their mind to think about that experience. Now, in our situation, that's a really positive run, right? Like most of the time, people love their first experience. You know, their mom took them to a show or something like that. And there may be instances where that's not appropriate for your organization, so just be thoughtful of that. Digital nostalgia is now very important, not still, very important. So things like photographs and things like that. Facebook memories is the example of digital nostalgia. They're bringing back those things, not for a monetary reason, but for an engagement reason. You go in and check Facebook memories or see that pop up so that you'll go and spend some time. Oh, my son, 9 years ago, he was blah, blah, blah. That's the engagement that they want. These companies know exactly what they're doing with things like Facebook memories. And then using language like remember. Remember when you first walked in. Remember when you shared a meal with a friend. Remember, like that type of language helps them to envision that time in their heads when something of importance happened and it relates to now what you're talking about. So here's the research on that. Remember, what's old is really gold. And here's an example of an organization doing that really, really, really well. An organization called Ocean Conservancy has a section in their supporters like you, which is great framing. They talk about ocean memories. And they have both social proof, so they have stories of people who are talking about their donating and things like that, but their first memory of being in the ocean and whatnot. Very, very powerful. Go check it out. The stories are really cool, but it's a great example of using that nostalgia for that effect. So the last one that I want to talk about before we get into other concepts is the idea of limited choice and defaults, which you're probably familiar with. The idea to remember here is that donors rejoice in limited choice. Donors rejoice in limited choice. So the study that was done is about jam at a grocery store. If there are 24 jams on a table and you ask people to buy, they're less likely to do so than if there's just 6 jams on the table. They're actually 10 times more likely to buy with fewer choices. The same thing is true, defaults, is about organ donations. So if you presume opt in to organ donations, people are twice as likely to actually stay in organ donation universe than if you make it an if you force people to opt out versus assume that they are opted in, it changes how likely they are to donate their organs. So the idea in how to do this is to reduce choice difficulty. You don't need more than 3 options on your website of amounts to give. You don't need all kinds of, you don't need to ask them for their social security number and their favorite color and their firstborn child's name. Reduce the number of choices so that it's very easy and frictionless to make a gift, and it's helpful for them to understand how to do that. So eliminate any options that are not immediately critical. And then adapt that to the donor experience. So the website can have something different than a face-to-face appeal. The best example of this is at some point, McDonald's stopped asking if you wanted fries with that. Why? Because they had Happy Meals, right? They had value meals or whatever that came with fries. They assumed that you wanted fries with it and created that package. So create the package that actually appeals to your donors so that you don't have to ask for an add-on. It makes it easier for them to have those relationships already built in. And then use trust wisely, because if you mess up the default, then it will trigger that weighting and balancing element. So here's the study, not going to go into that. Here's a brilliant example of limited choice from the International Rescue Committee. They assume that you'll give monthly. There's still an option to give once, but here's the targeted kind of, this will best help, just like the other example that we had. Another example of a default or a highlight here from Solid Ground, where they're pegging this like sort of in the middle of the set of numbers. And then here are some examples of bad ones, right? Not so good ones. So the pegged amount is low. It's at the bottom of the range and it's one time. Here's just another example using the same system with pegged amount at low and one time. So those are things to immediately change on your side if possible. So before we get into caution, and before we get further, I want to kind of clarify, there are ways in which you can screw this up. There's a concept called reactance, which you want to avoid. If you hard sell someone, the example that's used in science is a clothing ad. If you hard sell someone on these behavioral science principles, they actually revert back and they don't engage in the way that you want them to. So the thing to remember here is, to be a superstar, to be a fundraising superstar, don't go too far. Don't go too far. Don't misuse these behavioral science principles, particularly things like urgency and defaults. You can mess up on both of those things, on urgency and defaults, in a way that causes people to react, to retract. Make sure that the donor is in control. This isn't about manipulating a donor into giving. If you don't care about animal rights, you're not going to give anyway. But it's not about manipulating into giving you more. It's about making it easier for them to do what they already want to do. And then if there are things that need to change, whether it's a donor level or how the donors interact with you, that can trigger reactance. So give people time to relate to those changes. There's the study on that reactance piece. And here's one other, so we're gonna go into kind of beyond the current decision science with our last few minutes, but before we do that, I want to share with you one bonus, which is all of those phrases are things that you will remember, maybe not all of them because there were 12 of them, but many of them are things that you will remember, like old is gold. You will remember them because they are a rhyme, and that is a behavioral heuristic. That is a element of how you can do that. And my friend Emma at the Smith Center does one that's called Heart of the Art, which is really good. It's really catchy. So if you can phrase your concepts as a rhyme, they will be remembered. So try and do that if possible. But let's go beyond the existing behavioral science of the last few minutes that we have here together. One thing that you're probably familiar with is that demographic or psychographic data is easily accessible and also really important. So if we know that someone's middle-aged or someone's older, that might help us target a particular offer towards them. Older people might be more interested in planned giving, younger people might be more interested in monthly giving, those types of things. We've talked about now 12, 13 principles of behavioral science and neuromarketing. And then the thing that we haven't talked about is donor-provided data, focus groups, and things like donor surveys and whatnot. The problem with everything that I've told you in the last 45 minutes is that we're guessing. We are trying. All of these things require trial and error, but we're never completely right. And here are the reasons. And so the kind of core concept is this idea of what Dr. Howard Moskowitz calls mind genomics. And what it does is sort of compile the best of all of these things into a science that really understands donor motivations. So very quickly, I'm not going to play this, although it does play for you when you get the slides. Malcolm Gladwell talks about Howard as his personal hero. He talks about how Howard was able to create chunky spaghetti sauce and some of these other concepts that we're aware of through the idea of limited choice and some good science. So I'd encourage you to watch it. It's really hilarious and really helpful in understanding the guy I learned from, Howard Moskowitz. Howard has used this at a bunch of different Fortune 500 companies, all the ones that you've seen and plenty more, and now is making this science accessible to nonprofits. The problem, as I mentioned, is that with demographic or behavioral science or even donor data, things don't drive decision making as best they could. So you might have older English men who like music. That might mean Ozzy Osbourne, and it might mean Prince Philip. Those are two very different types of people. And I've indicated to you here, those things are hyperlinked so you can follow the slides on the problems with some of the things that we've talked about. When it comes to our approaches to things right now, especially with nonprofits, A/B testing, for example, costs money, not just in terms of doing it, but also in leaving money on the table. If you test A and A works, that means B didn't work and cost you a bunch of money. Donor surveys may not be expensive to do, but there's this concept of pro-social bias. So we want to seem good in a survey. So we respond in ways that say, yeah, we'll donate to those things, but we actually don't. And then focus groups are really hard to do. They're expensive to coordinate and all of those things. So what Mind Genomics does is offer better insights with a concept called conjoint analysis. So rather than asking questions and biasing the donor, we create these statements in context and have them evaluate the statements to decode what their actual beliefs are to help them to help us understand how to use those unspoken motivations to help see what things that they might care about. We can also do rapid concept testing in a sandbox environment. So we don't have to talk to your donors. We can talk to people who are sort of like your donors or in the same area. So if you're in Northeast Indiana, we can find the people in Northeast Indiana and test a concept with them. We can also have results in hours rather than days or weeks or months. We've done it in literally an hour, which is really cool. And then be able to create methods to find out how to calibrate those two donor preferences, even when we don't know exactly where they fall. So we get a scientific comparative advantage to this process. We stop guessing and wasting money on some of these heuristics, and we are able to get these results really, really quickly. So I've gone through that obviously very, very quickly. There's a ton of information. If you are interested in learning more, I'm going to share more of what we talked about here online through these different channels. If you're interested, feel free to connect with me. I love talking about these things. I have nothing to hide. I'm super transparent about all of this stuff. I want you all to be awesome at fundraising, grow your organizations, and have incredible impact. So as much as you can apply these things in your practice, whether it's the things that we talked about earlier or even some of these advanced concepts, I would just encourage you to do that. So with that, I want to open this up to questions, comments, concerns, recipes. I am super hungry. and go from there. So
You prompted quite a conversation on Twitter, and
oh,
I and potentially one other person have purchased Girl Scout cookies now because of you. They should hire you to do
mission
that.
accomplished.
Yeah.
There
So
is a shelter in New York City that has Girl Scout troops. So if you want to buy Girl Scout cookies, I would encourage you to buy from them. I've done that twice now.
oh, that's really cool. I love that.
I also
Um,
sent them to Canada. So
you also what?
sent them to Canada because they don't have Girl Scout cookies in the same
Oh, really?
kind of cookie. Yeah, so Leisha got a whole box of cookies.
I'm learning so much about Girl Scout cookies today. Um, so I have a couple really interesting questions.
Yeah.
So one of them that was related to the idea of creating a concept of scarcity. And Kathleen asked, when it comes to controlling the quantity for sponsorship opportunities, how do you make sure that you're maintaining that idea of scarcity to inspire sponsorships, but how do you make sure you're not over limiting yourself? But if you set a certain number of available slots or sponsorships for each level.
Yeah, so I have a friend who I've been helping out with her sponsor her gala, and we just set the number big enough that it fits within the overall sponsorship approach that we want to do. So 100 sponsors at $1,000, we know that 41 of them are committed. So there's 59 that are possible, and that's a win for her because she's had 41 in the past. So it's bigger than what they had before, meaning you can always leverage that. And if you get to 60, great, right? Tie goes to the runner there. So it's just about having more than what you need, and then enabling you to have a scarcity so it doesn't look like you're the first one. Nobody wants to be the first sponsor. Nobody wants to be the first donor, right? You want to go along with somebody who's done it already. It looks like there's a ton of questions, so I will answer each one of those questions afterwards, like even if I have to email you with the answers. So just don't feel like, just throw them in the chat question box, and I'm happy to do them because we might not get to all of them. I know we're over time.
Awesome.
Sorry.
Thank you. Oh no, I had so many people message us and say that this is awesome information. They're super excited about it. So no worries there. I think, well, Jennifer is asking if you could offer some more examples of loss aversion within an appeal that kind of it establishes the loss aversion theory without coming off as negative. How can she navigate that?
So Jennifer, we might want to talk more about what your concern is with being negative, because you sort of do want it to be negative. I'll give you the example from DMPA. It's these programs will be cut. The programs that we do for kids are the ones that are most likely to be cut because of what's happening with the pandemic and the recession. So if you feel like arts education is important, this is the thing that we need you as donors to save. That's the simple thing. And you can save it, right? Every $7 that you give us, for those of you who are in Central Iowa, or if you want, we have donors from all over. If you give us $7, that gives us the ability to say yes to a kid, to allow them to have access to arts education. But because of where we are and what's happening with our organization, those arts education programs are the ones that are threatened, that we're going to lose as a community. So that it needs to be a little negative because you need to make it real. And those are all true statements. Let's be clear. Like that's not hyperbole or anything. Like we will lose those programs if donors don't save them.
Yeah. It seems like there are some techniques that you talked about today that may not be applicable or even appropriate for some of the missions or causes that we're talking about.
Yeah.
One woman chimed in and said that she works for a rape crisis center, so establishing the sense of nostalgia is not going to be an easy task for her.
Exactly what I was thinking about. Yep, that's exactly right.
So if you all are concerned about applying all of these concepts to your own fundraising strategies, you don't stress yourself out. You don't have to use all of them. So
this isn't a tasting menu. This is a buffet. So pick what works for your organization, and absolutely for that organization or a whole bunch of other ones where there's triggering that could occur. Nostalgia is not the one that you want to use, or maybe there's nostalgia in some other way that you could use it. But yeah, don't. That was very. I didn't want to say that before when I was doing it, but that's exactly right. Pick which ones make sense for you then.
Awesome. Someone asked, RuPaul asked if you could explain the 25% versus the 75% use.
Yeah. So if you go to the grocery store and you look at all the ground beef, they all say things like 75% lean, 80% lean, 90% lean. That's because the science tells us that if you say 25% fat, people won't buy it. They'll be like, oh, that's too much fat. That's gross. So when you're framing things, you want to think this isn't dispositive because it depends on your organization and what your appeal is, but really pay attention to how you are framing things. And that arts example is a good one. I would want to test, how does 25% of our operating revenue work as opposed to 75% of our operating revenue type of thing. But just being thoughtful and mindful that literally everything you say, everything you put on print, everything you put on your website, everything you put in your email has a framing potential to it. Even pictures that you use has a framing and priming example. My friend Bernard in the UK said that there's a direct mail piece where it had like a fire truck in the background where there was a 29 on the truck, and the ask was for $19, and the 29 on the truck affected how much people responded to the $19 ask. If you change that number in the back, it will change how people respond to the ask, to the appeal.
Were they giving more than the $19? Were they giving, oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. A lot of neuroscientists get around in a room and they're like, we're so dumb, we're so irrational. Like, predictably irrational is the name of the book, right? We are not super bright people. But the key is, how do we use our mental shortcuts, our existing biases, to connect the dots and make it easier for donors to do what they already want to do?
So kind of to that end, Kristen just asked a really cool question. She's like, if you have a goal and you've raised 75% of it, would it be better to emphasize, hey, we've raised 75% of our goal? Or would it be better to say like, hey, we only have 25% to go?
No, that's exactly the example of the ground beef. So there's a reason why in capital campaigns, you always start with the big gifts, you get those out, and then the public campaign is always, here's the little bit that we need left to raise. So I didn't even need to hear the rest of the question. I knew, like, absolutely you want to say we have 75,000 of the 100,000. We just need the last bit to get us to goal. That's exactly how to frame it. Most of it's already done. People have already supported you. You're tying in things like social proof. You're tying in priming, all of that stuff.
That's super cool.
That's why the science of that capital campaign strategy works. That's why every capital campaign operates that exact same way. It's because that science is locked in.
That's a fun thing we've seen even on like peer-to-peer events and regular campaigns, not even capital campaigns. If you get people to sign up to participate or donate first or do whatever before your event goes public, it's much more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Peer-to-peer is social proof and framing. So you get a bunch of people who are already doing it and people who have given some, and you get all of those elements. And just like Giving Tuesday is a great example of where you use this, right? You have people who are ready to donate and then match gifts, right? All of those things function psychologically to reinforce, I'm not the only one, I'm not the first one, and I can get them over the hump, right? Like, I can get this to the finish line. That's another heuristic actually about how we don't like incomplete stories, but we'll talk about that online.
I have definitely donated to a campaign that I'd already supported because they were only a few dollars away.
Which is a great way of doing it. Yep, that's a smart strategy.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to be evaluating and examining every decision I make at least for the next 24 hours because this is going to be at the top of my mind. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I think a lot of us have a lot of food for thought. A lot of people have been sharing ideas that they have about how they can use this like right now. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. This was really fun.
My pleasure. Thanks everybody, and looking forward to connecting with you. Excited to share more.
Absolutely. And you guys keep an eye on your inboxes. I'm going to have this email out to you probably tomorrow afternoon. And if you were one of the group that missed a slide, don't worry, you will see it there. All right, everyone, have a great Thursday. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.